This is Mr. Gilliam. Today we're going to start learning about positive and negative numbers. This is on page 112 of your instruction book. There's not a ton of stuff to write down today. It's more informative. But if I underline something, please underline it as well. We'll talk about it again in class. And it says that positive numbers are greater than 0 and located to the right of 0 on a number line. So I'm just going to look at this first and talk about positive numbers. All the numbers that you've known since you were a little itsy bitsy baby and you counted, those are called positive numbers, okay? There's actually different number categories. The first number category will be called the natural numbers. And this is not in your book, so you'll have to write this down. Natural numbers. They start at 1, and it's just basically they're the counting numbers, 2, 3, 4. If I asked my son to count to 10, he would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Naturally, he would start at 1 and count upwards. So we call those the natural numbers, or sometimes they're called the counting numbers. The next category of numbers are the whole numbers. Whole numbers start with 0, and they are also all the natural or counting numbers as well. So the only difference between the natural numbers and the whole numbers is the number 0 is included. And if you look at the word whole, you notice that there's a big fat 0 or an O in the middle of the word whole. So that's how I remember that whole numbers start at 0 and increase with the counting numbers or the natural numbers. Okay. Then we have what we call integers. Those are all the numbers greater than 0 that are whole numbers or counting numbers, and all the numbers below 0 forever and ever. That are no decimals, no fractions, just the whole numbers that are positive or negative. Each of these different number categories is different. So if I asked you about the number 2, you could say that it is a natural number, it is a whole number, and it is an integer. If I asked you about the number 0, you could say that it's a whole number and an integer. So some numbers fall under more than one classification, but it just depends on the number as well. When we talk about decimals, we talk about fractions. Anything that can be written as a decimal or a fraction. Well, we'll talk more about rational numbers later, but for today, what we're going to talk about is just both the positives and the negative numbers, and we call those integers. Okay? Negative numbers are less than 0 and are located to the left on the number line. The number 0 is neither positive nor negative. So positive numbers we're going to have in blue. Anything on this side, 0 to the right. Negative numbers we're going to have in red. Anything this way to the left. And I'm going to put green 0. I'm going to put a green dot on 0 because it is neither positive or negative. Okay, and that's going to be important here in just a second. Okay. Sometimes positive and negative numbers could be called signed numbers. Okay. Now, when we write all of our numbers, we don't always put a plus sign in front of them to make sure that they represent positive numbers. We know if there's no number, if there's no indicator whether it is positive or negative, it is always positive. Okay. Anything with a minus sign in front of it we consider to be negative. One of the things I want you to look at on this number line is the distances between each number and 0. So this is really the most important concept of today. I see that the number 1 is 1 away from 0, and I see that its counterpart, or what we're going to learn about is opposite, is also 1 away from 0. You can see that 2 is 2 away from 0, and its opposite, negative 2, is also 2 away from 0. So 0 is really the most important number on the number line for a 6th grader because it is the center of the math number line. Everything that happens on the right side of 0, the positive side, also happens on the left side, the negative side. For a 5, there's a negative 5. For a 10, there's a negative 10. And the important part to keep in mind is that they're the same distance away from 0 each time. So 3 is 1, 2, 3 away from 0, and its opposite is also 3 away from 0. Together, they are 6 apart. So we're going to learn a little bit more about opposites here in just a second. You can write positive numbers with or without a plus sign. Most of the time we're not going to write. We're going to have it without a plus sign. Negative numbers always must be written with a negative sign, okay? Negative numbers must be written with a negative sign. That's not optional. If there is no sign at all, we consider them to be positive. So if you're talking about a negative number, you must write a minus sign in front of the number, not behind. You will notice in my list of integers here, at no point in time did I put the minus behind the number, okay? When we talk, we say -3 or -2. Well, we need to write it just like we speak it. Negative sign comes in front of the number, okay? If it's behind the number, someday you'll learn, if we had 5 minus 3, that is much different than -5 minus 3. So this negative, if you want it to apply to a number, it's always the number behind. Okay, always the number behind. I don't think that was a very good example. But the negative always goes in front of the number that you want to be negative. When solving with a positive and negative number, it's important to think about how far from zero the number is and in which direction. That'll really help with your cardinality, your sense of your number sense, understanding how far away a number is from zero. So I know that 1 is 1 away from zero, and I know -1 is away from zero. I know 5 is 5 away from zero, 5 spaces. I know -5 is 5 spaces away from zero, just in the other direction. So we call it negative. All right. Temperatures above zero we consider positive. Temperatures below zero are negative. Look at the thermometer. 20 degrees Fahrenheit is 20 degrees above 0 degrees. -20 degrees Fahrenheit is 20 degrees below 0 degrees. -30 is 30 degrees below 0, and 30 degrees Celsius is 30 degrees above 0. So, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes we have these things where we compare the numbers. So when I talk about like -20 and -30, and I want to compare using greater than, less than, or equal to, I know for sure they're not equal to, but it's difficult for students to understand that -20 is actually bigger than -30. 20, okay, on a number line, the numbers get bigger to the right and smaller to the left. -20 is only 20 spaces from 0 and is located here. -30 is 30 spaces from 0 and is located farther to the left on the number line. Because -20 is farther towards the positives, it's actually greater than -30. So we would put the greater than sign in for that one. So that will be something you need to really think about probably as we're just learning negative numbers. Numbers that have the same distance from 0 but in opposite directions are called opposite numbers. Every whole number, fraction, and decimal has an opposite. So the opposite of 4 is -4. The reason that 4 and -4 are opposites is because they are both the same distance from the special number that's in the center, 0. It's 4 spaces to 0. This way, to the right we call it positive, to the left we call it negative. Okay. It says, to plot a point at 4, count 4 units to the right of 0 and draw a point. To plot a point at -4, count 4 units to the left of 0 and draw a point. Think about folding a number line in half so that the fold goes through 0. Numbers that line up are opposites. So if I folded this over like 0 is the line of symmetry, 8 would land on top of 8, -8. 7 would land on top of -7. 6 would land on top of -6. Okay. All the whole numbers and their opposites are called integers. So that's what we talked about earlier. So 0, and this keeps going. So if you want to put the dot, 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 that does keep going in both directions forever. All the numbers labeled on the number line above are integers. You'll notice that integers don't have any decimals or fractions or anything like that involved. When we start adding decimals and fractions, we start talking about what we call rational numbers. But they're only rational if they have a pattern or they end. We'll learn a little bit more about that later this year. So let's think about the numbers -10 and 10. How could you describe these numbers? What is the same? What is different about these numbers? -10 and 10. What I see right away is that there's a negative sign in front of this 10, and there's no negative sign in front of that one. So this one would be negative here, and this one would be positive here. So that's one thing that I noticed that's different about them. I know something that's the same about them is that they're the same distance from 0. So in this case, negative 10 and 10 are opposites. Both numbers are 10 units from 0, but the direction is different. So those are the two things, the main things that they're talking about there. There wasn't a ton of stuff to write down today, but I hope you start understanding kind of how negative numbers work, where the positives are, they're always to the right, and where the negatives are, they're always to the left. If we're talking about greater than or less than, always the number farther to the right is the greater number. Okay, so if you're thinking about some numbers like this, negative 14 compared to negative 13, or negative 25 compared to negative 10. Positive numbers you've been trained to, and you're probably pretty good at writing greater than, less than, or equal to on them. But when we think about negative numbers, it's a little trickier. Negative 13 is 13 away from 0. Negative 14 is 14 away from 0. So the number farther to the right is the greater than number. So this number is greater than negative 14, so I will have to open towards the negative 13. Okay, or the less than sign. Negative 14 is less than negative 13. And that's kind of counterintuitive because 14 is actually, the number 14 as a positive is bigger than 13 as a positive. But because we're going the other direction, our inequality sign has to actually flip sides. So again, if I look at this next one here, there's 0. 10 to the left will be negative 10. Only 10 to the left. 25 to the left will be way back here, negative 25. So because negative 10 is farther to the right on the number line, it's actually greater than negative 25. So negative 25 would be less than negative 10. Our inequality is always open towards the bigger number. All right. I'm sure we're going to have some of those in our homework.